And we're back, everybody. My name is Samantha and Zessie.
My name is Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And this is Masculinity. Thank you for tuning in.
I want to be this hot taker. I'm going to give you the hottest of hot takes right now. And nobody's going to like it. And I'm sorry.
But nobody, you mean me? Or I'm just kidding. You guys, he means you guys. Okay.
Atlanta, season 2 sucks.
Careful. It's so good. I don't understand. What about it don't you like? I love it. You know what I love? Well, first, why don't you tell me why it sucks?
Well, I mean, season 1 set an incredibly high bar of being this bizarre, of world building and this bizarre place where the absurd can happen, but the absurd and it happening means that there is the potential for this absurdity to happen in everyday life. And these characters constantly with their stories intertwined and interweaving make this melange of real and surreal. And it was so cool because it was in a community and in a place that was almost dystopic and forgotten. And now we just have these boring narratives that try too hard to be bizarre and weird, and it's just 30 minutes of the same narrative, and I'm just like, Ern, shut up.
Wait, are you up to date?
Yeah.
The episode, spoiler alert, the episode where he's like sitting in the back chopping it up with his homie, and then dude pulls a gun on him. That's like his friend. And they made him walk. Oh my God, are you crazy? Whatever. Okay, fine. I disagree, and that's okay. So I finally started watching This Is Us, and I wanted to like watch it and be like, it's so good. It's so good, and it's like really sappy, but like I'm not that type of person who doesn't like that. I love sappy shit. And there's all these representations of like love between men. You know, like so much like family love, like support, gentleness, compassion. And like I love Randall's character because like the character of Randall because he's like it's interesting because he like embodies kind of like, you know, he's like the perfect dad, the perfect husband, and you can tell that like, you know, the weight of his family is resting on his shoulders in a lot of ways, and he handles it. It's like interesting because it's like a portrait of a traditional family, but he handles it with so much grace and care. You know, these are examples and representations of masculinity, I think, not just of men, but of masculinity that I don't know if we really ever saw before.
Well, I guess it's a perfect time to transition into why we're here today and why we're really excited about this show. So throughout this whole thing of the Masculinity Podcast, we've been exploring the quote-unquote performance of masculinity as the foundation of this all. We've been covering many ways that we, all of us, expect men to carry and exhibit the, in quotes again, the natural male traits rather than see it more as a performance. And there's really no fun in it. I mean, we've been talking about how much of a bummer it is that the performance of masculinity is a go-to for many men instead of just processing what they are dealing with, not only because it's what they've been culturally taught and societally taught, but also because we are all mostly complicit in upholding that structure one way or another. What's unhelpful or, you know, toxic as we've all been saying these days is that the performance has become the default rather than just being honest and human about your shit.
Exactly. And so today what we want to do is flip this idea of performing gender on its head by engaging in an awesome conversation with a very special guest with whom we'll get to explore what it's like to perform exaggerated femininity as a man. So we're lucky to have Ben Strothmann, also known as Honey LaBronx.
AKA.
Yeah. Ben is not only a performer, but also a dedicated animal rights activist who is vegan and generally just a very
Shout out to the fellow vegans.
Oh, yeah. Remoy is a vegan.
Hell
Yay!
Yeah. I am not a vegan, but, you know,
Hey,
I'm in solidarity.
No one's perfect. You know?
Well played.
You try.
Well played.
You're doing your best.
Yeah, so thank you for being here. You're just an awesome, just a very intelligent dude, so we're really happy to have you on the show and talk about these.
Oh, my God. I'm on the Masculinity podcast. You guys, I have been listening to you since episode 1.
Aww.
And you guys have had some really incredible, not just conversations about masculinity, but like some really awesome guests. And so I am following in some big shoes right now. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like do you have so many different ways that, I mean, we've talked at length about this show and like the things that we're trying to do and, you know, kind of where you're coming from, where I'm coming from. And you have so many different ways that you're like tackling the system. I mean, you're like an animal rights activist, you're vegan, you're a podcast host, you're a drag queen, and probably you're a singer, so many different things that I probably don't even know. And so I just love that you're challenging the status quo from so many different fronts. But, you know, first and foremost, how did you decide to become a drag queen?
I don't think I ever really decided that. It just kind of always appealed to me, if that makes any sense. When I say I would play with my mom's makeup growing up, I don't mean like most drag queens where like they discovered how to like apply a fierce beat when they were like 5. I mean, like I would just draw on my face with my mom's lipstick. You know what I mean? And, I mean, if my mom came home and she saw that her makeup had been ransacked, it was never my sisters that got in trouble. I was always the first, like, Ben, were you going through my makeup again? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, like, maybe you should just buy me some. Oh my God, that never occurred to me. Like, maybe you should buy your son some makeup so he can play with it. That just hit me right now. But like the idea of wearing a woman's clothes just always seemed like cheeky and fun and silly to me. Probably because like you're not supposed to do it, or seeing like Bugs Bunny dress in drag, and like that always just seemed so fun to me. And yeah, I've probably always I've never really had a chance to do that as a kid. I never really had a chance to dress in drag, but you know, like after watching the movie Thelma and Louise, if you left a handkerchief out, I would wrap it around my head and put on sunglasses, and it felt like instant drag to me, you know? Just, yeah, and it wasn't real. I had my drag name picked out probably from the time I was about 19, and I never actually did drag until I turned 30. So like for 11 years walking around with, I knew my drag name. I'm like, yes, I am Honey LaBronx. That's my drag name. But never knowing who she was, and like wondering like, what would I look like as a drag queen? What would my personality be like as a drag queen? And yeah.
But wait, so how, do we have the same question? I don't know. How did you know that Honey LaBronx would exist, not knowing who Honey LaBronx was? Like, how did you get the name Honey LaBronx?
Oh my! If you ever ask a drag queen how they got their drag name, just buckle up for the least interesting story you'll ever hear.
Oh.
Pretty much, it's usually not an interesting story.
Oh.
But with that said, my first before I was Honey LaBronx, I used to think of my Roberta Mystique. That would be my drag name. It was my training bra name, basically. But then I saw the movie Beaches when I was like in 3rd or 4th grade, like you do when you're like, you know, a 8-year-old boy. You watch Beaches and cry. You know.
I did. I grew up with a single mom, and that thing was on repeat.
Oh, thank you. The lessons that you have to learn in 3rd grade, really, I mean, Bette Midler and Barbara Hershey are there to spell that out for you. But hearing Bette Midler's character, Cece Bloom.
Well, I have not seen Beaches. Thank you.
They all die in the end. Spoiler alert. Hearing Bette Midler's character, she's telling her friend, you know, she lives in New York City, but she's like, well, it doesn't say New York City. Oh, well, I don't live really in the city. I live in the Bronx. Hearing the Bronx, hearing a city that started with a the in it, just struck my ear as odd. I'm like, that's weird. I would never say I'm from the Milwaukee or the Wauwatosa, my suburb. It just always stuck out in my ear, the Bronx. And when I first started coming to visit New York when I was like 16 and then 18, hearing nothing sounds more New York-y to me than like, yeah, the Bronx. It just sounds tough, you know, and it just sounds cool. And I also studied Spanish when I was a kid, and I really loved the language. And I started thinking, I wonder if in Spanish they say La Bronx. The minute I said La Bronx, it hit me, and I thought, oh, LaBronx, Honey LaBronx. That will be my drag name. The end. That's how I had my drag name picked out.
That's amazing.
But I love my drag name. I think Honey
it's great.
LaBronx
That's why I was
is
like,
just the best drag name that there is. No, there's actually... Well, my drag mom, she won season 8 of RuPaul's Drag Race.
Oh my God.
Her name is Bob the Drag Queen. There's just not a better drag name than that. Oh, also my drag sister, who is now on season 10 of Drag Race. This is true before either of them was on Drag Race, so it's not just bragging rights, but I'm kind of important. My drag sister, her name is Ms. Cracker, spelled like the snack or racial slur. She says, "Because I am thin, white, and salty." But really there funny. Is a better drag name out there. There is a drag queen in Australia whose drag name is Karen from Finance. Okay. Welcome to the stage, okay. Karen from Finance.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That is perfect. I am entertained right now.
That's the best. That's the best name. And then somewhere down the list, there's Honey LaBronx.
Okay, before we go any further and just like kind of back up, like just humor me here. Like I'm from Texas. I'm Philistine. I'm straight-laced. In your kind of like personal definition, what would you describe drag as? Or if you could explain it to quote unquote the everyday American, what is drag?
So what does drag mean? If you'd first asked me what drag meant, that changes for me throughout the years. I first thought drag meant when a man dresses up like a woman. And of course, that can mean a lot of different things. Can be a man dressing up as a woman. That could be, drag, I should say that there is drag, there is being a transvestite, and there's also being transgender. And the language on these things are changing or evolving or becoming more distinct through the years. Like this is going to probably sound like a dated episode in like a week. But, a transvestite, for example, which is the furthest thing from what I am or what a trans person is someone, usually a heterosexual male who just gets some thrill out of dressing up like a woman. Like Eddie Izzard, for example, a famous actor and comedian, is a transvestite. He's a heterosexual, straight, cisgender male who just, or at least I think he's cisgender, who just likes dressing up in women's clothing. For whatever reason, he gets a thrill out of it, whether it's sexual or otherwise. Transgender, of course, is someone who was assigned a certain gender at birth, but they identify as the opposite gender. Or, of course, there's gender queer or gender fluid, where they're like, fuck gender, I don't identify as any particular gender, or today I feel like a woman, tomorrow I don't. Drag, which I would have thought of is just dressing as the opposite gender's clothes. But some people would just say drag is just the art of blurring the lines of gender, or the art of giving the middle finger to gender. Or drag is basically, as some would say, just fuck gender. This is arguable, but our language and culture is so many years old. Who can say where things came from? But some used to say that in theatrical terms, back when women were not allowed to, all the things that they weren't allowed to do, but when they weren't allowed to perform in theater, and men would play women's roles, they used to write in the script, allegedly dressed resembling a girl, which I doubt that, because I don't really think they would use those words, like dressed resembling a girl. I don't think Shakespeare would have said that. But D-R-A-G, dressed resembling a girl, means drag.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, many people, impersonate famous people regularly, but you actually have like an alter ego in Honey LaBronx. We learned the name, but how did you conjure up that alter personality or ego or that performance?
Oh, wow. That leads us into a conversation about masculinity. And I should say that you just helped me realize that there's one other sort of distinction here. There is drag, and then there's female impersonation. Both fall under the umbrella of drag, but a lot of drag queens will just do female impersonation. Like, oh yeah, I do Tina Turner, or I do Cher, or I do, Nancy Pelosi. I'm kidding. Nancy.
Like, really?
Sure, why not?
I'm sure that would be fun.
But whereas most drag queens I know just have their own drag character, and oftentimes they're not necessarily even a character. A lot of drag queens are kind of just themselves. Like Bob the Drag Queen is not a character. Bob the Drag Queen is the same person in, drag, and out. Whereas I've always been a character actor. So, I remember, some of the characters that I've played. I played this like 40, 50-year-old, probably a 50-year-old Texan, when I was 30. So I made myself look like this character who looked, if I showed you a picture, people are shocked. They're like, that's not you. In fact, one day in between shows, we got dressed up for the first show, realized there was only one person in the audience. They decided to come back in the evening for the evening show, and so I was like, I'm not doing this makeup again. So I
wore it all day.
I just wore it all day,
Yes.
and I went out and I ran into some friends, and I was talking to someone I knew, and it was like I realized like 5 minutes into the conversation, he thought I was just some new person like visiting New York. And I'm like, no, it's me. And he like looked into my eyes like he was trying to find me through the bushes. He's like, oh my God, that is you. So when I put on a costume, I become someone else. I guess I should say, growing up gay, there's so many different ways into this. I don't know which is the best, but there were different parts of me that like I felt I wasn't supposed to express, but I was taught as a kid. Like I remember, best example, I was standing with my hands on my hips one day, just like you do. I remember my dad like freaked out a little bit. He's like, no, thumbs back. Like if your forefingers are towards your stomach, your thumb should be like on your kidney. Like that's how boys stand. Girls stand with your fingers on your kidney and your thumb on your abs. Like he didn't break it down like that, but
I was like, wow.
It was like, I'm trying to like recreate it
image.
visually for the audience. You know, like I'm sure there's people listening to this like doing that right now. But like he just wrote, thumbs back for boys, thumbs forward for girls. And so growing up, when I would just like want to just chill and relax and just put my hands on my hips, I'm like, I forget which way. So I'm just going to stand with my arms at my side or just cross my arms. Like I learned to repress my body language because my natural first inclination might be a tell that I'm different. It might give away that like, I'm a little more girly than the other guys. So I learned to kind of hide all those things as a kid. And here I am in drag for the first time where all of those things are actually an asset to the illusion that I'm trying to create. And in fact, I remember Alexis Michelle from season 9 of Drag Race is the person who first put me in drag for the first time. And I remember like the first thing she taught me, which is like first thing out of the box, you need to learn how to walk because you're walking like a guy. You need to walk very different. You need to channel your femininity. Like where does that come from? It kind of comes from the hips, blah, blah, blah. And like having to learn to literally walk in this world as a woman, I had to learn how to now shut off anything that was masculine and like channel the stuff that was feminine that maybe I never was allowed to channel, and like had to find where that would be, and like allow myself like, you know what, I am gonna stand with my hands on my hips the way I want to because that is what feels natural right now. So I would say that Honey LaBronx, who she is as a character, sort of came out of all of these parts of me that I had to like sort and label and compartmentalize as a kid. It's like, look, those are neatly set aside for me for when I need them now. Let's bring them all out and wear them as a, performance.
That is incredible. I mean, it's interesting because like I feel like in the past few minutes that you've been here, I've already learned so much because I had like all these ideas about what drag was, like what the process was like, and it's actually not at all what's true. So because I want to actually talk a little bit about this performance of femininity and kind of versus the performance of masculinity. Like I think we've been talking about the performance of masculinity as something that's kind of like inadvertent, right? Like we think and a lot of men think that these like traits of masculinity that they have to put on are things that are actually inside of them, and it's like more having to do with some type of defense mechanism. And listening to you, it sounds like it's like drawing from one part of yourself versus another part of yourself, right? Yeah. Which is a correction, so thank you. And what I'm curious about is like I feel like I also have to perform femininity in a way that, and like when I think about the performance of femininity, for me, it's like what I've been told. Like my mom growing up told me like a girl like you should be like nice and quiet or whatever the hell she said. She says that to me all the time. Which like generally I am actually pretty nice and quiet, and like there are moments where I'm like not, right? And so, and that those are the parts of myself that I feel like I had to suppress, right? And so, it's interesting because, before you walked in, I was like thinking about like, Remoy and I were kind of bantering like, okay, so like the performance of femininity for me versus the performance of femininity as a drag queen. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, there's gotta be like notions, completely forgetting about the fact that I also hold like masculine, interpreted like just feelings and also mannerisms and whatever that I had to suppress in the favor of the performance of femininity. I'm like, oh, like where are your inspirations coming from for femininity? And really, it's just about expressing the femininity that you already have.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess, on that flip side is about letting those parts of femininity that are a little bit like stronger than the docile, nice, whatever, and letting the parts out of masculinity that are, strong, leader, whatever those, I mean, I don't know. I feel like what I'm saying kind of sounds problematic, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Just the things that we associate with masculine versus the things that we associate with feminine. And like finding a way for all of that to be expressed and not have to amend it based on the situation, even though it sounds like.
Could I ask? I keep hearing you saying it's different than what you thought it was. Could I ask, like, what your understanding of drag was?
Yeah, for sure. I thought so. For me, drag was like, it was just a performance of feminine. I mean, I've never seen like like masculinity being performed as drag. So for me, what I understood drag to be was like, guys performing femininity, and like, but like the funnest, most like outrageous part of femininity, instead of like this kind of notion of femininity that we have that women are supposed to just be like nice or whatever, but instead just being like loud, and like proud about like being strong and feminine and awesome.
I think I should say that there's a drag queen by the name of Acid Betty who was on season 8 of Drag Race with Bob, who she's very her name is Acid Betty. You can imagine what she looks like. She's this out loud punk rock, like off the wall look queen. A look queen is someone who's known for turning looks. Looking at her as a guy and as a drag queen, there's nothing about her that I think is feminine in behavior, but it's about creating an exaggerated, like, I don't even know how to say exaggerated. Like, imagine if you plugged a drag queen into a wall and rock music started playing, like heavy metal. She's a drag monster. It's an exploded femininity monster, but I don't think she would say that it's about performing femininity for her. I think it's about like recreating femininity. I think there's a lot of drag, I think, is about reimagining gender expression and reimagining one's femininity or masculinity or wherever you want to go with that, or maybe one's desire to create a third or 17th option. Like maybe it's a desire to find what else there is other than masculine and feminine. And I have to just say, it's interesting to me to hear what other people think of drag, because I've done a lot of things in my time that I'm not proud of. I once waited tables at a Dave & Buster's in Times Square.
Oh, I love that Dave & Buster's.
Yeah.
I used to scoop Dippin' Dots at an amusement park, so
hard times. I was discovering drag around the time that I was doing this job. And, so people that I worked with knew that I was a drag queen. And this one coworker, somehow we were discussing drag one day, and he asked me, I forget what he asked me or what he said about drag, but it made me stop and ask him for a second. I'm like, wait. What do you think I am as a drag? Because something he said made me realize he thinks I'm a drag queen because I would rather not be a guy. And I'm like, no, honey, that's a different thing. And then he was like, well, wait a minute. So like when you have, so often, like explaining oneself as a gay man or even as a drag queen can be so embarrassing because it requires opening up such a part of oneself that like isn't always put on view or put under the microscope in like general society, but we're sort of expected to. And that he was like, wait a minute, but like if you're having sex with someone, you're having sex like dressed as a woman, right? I'm like, again, what do you think? What? No judgment if that's what someone's into, but that is not what I am. Like, and he's like, Ben, I think if you spoke with most of your coworkers, that's what everyone naturally assumes. And we like took a survey. He's like, so and so. What do you think? What do you think? And everyone was like, yeah, I just naturally assume if you're dating someone, you're dating them as a woman, or you're having sex as a woman, or if you had your choice, you'd rather be a woman. And I'm like, no, like I'm so happy being a dude. So it's interesting to me how confusing drag is for a lot of people, and it helps me understand like that must be part of what's so confronting for people when they see a drag queen. Like they're forced to confront their own ideas of what they think that is. I bet you if most people realize just how silly and natural and non-offensive drag is, that like, yeah, it's as simple as that Bugs Bunny dressing up as a woman just for the sake of being silly or for performing. There's something I want to kind of lead into an aside that I don't otherwise think we'll get to, but just talking about drag, there's a whole controversy in the world of drag right now, specifically as it pertains to RuPaul's Drag Race. RuPaul, who I do not consider RuPaul to be, a leader on the front of gender expression and whatnot. RuPaul has often said things that are very problematic. And to what you said earlier, to your point, you're like, I feel like what I'm going to say is problematic. Listen, as my high school choir teacher taught us, if you're going to make a mistake, make it loud. But in Drag Race, and I'll end with this because there's so much more to get to, RuPaul recently made some very transphobic comments.
Really?
Yes. I mean, I don't think she realized that they were transphobic, but there have been a lot of drag queens on Drag Race who are trans women, and some trans women also do drag. A lot of trans people kind of discover their transness by like first getting into drag and then realizing, oh my God, that actually feels closer to my authentic self than, And they're like, well, yeah, but they didn't come out as trans until they were on the show. And so that's why it's okay, because they weren't trans when they coming into it and they came out on the show. That RuPaul was basically saying like Drag Race is not for trans women, or is not for women who like come in being upfront that they're trans. Or then she said, I think the comment she made was talking about having gender confirming surgery, like having a breast augmentation or otherwise. And RuPaul made some comment saying, like, listen, you can be an athlete and take performance-enhancing drugs, just not in the Olympics. That was her comment. Basically saying, look, you don't get to come on RuPaul's Drag Race and have a boob job. And I want to be like, really, RuPaul, who has songs about wanting rhinoplasty and wanting your face snatched and wanting your ribs removed. And I don't know that she's had any of that done, but she has songs where she jokes about all I want for Christmas is my ribs removed, etc. I don't need them no more. Anyway, it was just so silly of her to say that, I think, because it does not agree with, and I'll close with this. RuPaul is the first person to say, drag is about saying fuck you to gender. And I'm like, really? But no women allowed? Really? Like, the next thing I would love to see on Drag Race would be a cisgendered female drag queen. And I don't mean a drag king. Drag king, that is for a separate audience. Drag kings, drag queens, in my opinion, it's a different art. And drag kings could have their own show. I don't think it would make sense to put drag kings on RuPaul's Drag Race. Send me hate mail all you want. But in the world of drag, I think you can have, cisgendered gay men doing drag. You could also have straight men. I would love to see a straight man as a drag queen on Drag Race.
I would actually love to see that.
And I would love to see a trans women drag queens on Drag Race. And I know several. In fact, I performed with one. My friend Melissa, her drag name, Faye Ludes, like Quaaludes, Faye Ludes, in Chicago. She is a cisgendered female drag queen, and she is killing it. She's doing everything a drag queen does and just as well. And I wouldn't say she's at some advantage because she's a natural, woman. I mean, she's still got to do all the makeup. She may not have to tuck, but you know what? Not all men necessarily have to tuck. Anyway. So that's what I have to say about drag and the problematic stuff happening in the world of drag. That's a whole separate conversation.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that you hit here. For the sake of time, unfortunately, we can't delve into all of them. But one thing that I definitely want to get into is this conversation, like within. So I think that a lot of times people have this notion that like, within the LGBTQ community, like everybody's welcome, everyone's great. Like, and I mean, in a way, it's kind of like a dehumanization, right? Like not understanding that people within the community of, LGBTQ folks have their own issues that they're dealing with, and that like the system of patriarchy unfortunately also pervades that. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of like, I know that some people have, and I think you touched on this a little bit, have issues with drag, but also what I want to talk to you about is masculinity and like the performance of gender within the LGBTQ community, more specifically within the gay community.
Yeah. Well, something that Bob the drag queen once said, he was being interviewed for a documentary, and he was saying, I think it must be really hard to be, and this is an assumption, obviously, but he's like, I think it must be really hard being a straight guy because the onus is always on you to prove your heterosexuality. Like if you're standing around with a bunch of your buddies and someone jokes that you're gay, you have to prove you're not. You have to say, you can't just be like, okay. You can't just be like, whatever. Like you have to like say something or do something about it. And what's funny is for me, like as a gay man, I don't ever feel the need to do that. Like my homosexuality, I'm comfortable with. I don't have to prove that I'm gay. And if someone said that I was or wasn't, I'm like, all right, yeah, cool. I mean, growing up though, I do identify with that growing up, where if someone accused me of being gay when I was earlier, before I was out or before I was comfortable talking about it, I also had to prove, you always have to prove that you're not. But even in the MSM community, which is what I would refer to it, not the gay.
Oh, right, yeah.
I mean, and that's no, it's not a sorry thing. It's I mean, there is the gay community, and what I'm about to talk about, I would call the MSM community, because that's the men who have sex with men community, and not all men who have sex with men identify as gay, and even therein, I should just back up and say that when I'm about to say toxic masculinity, I have my own sort of working definition of what it is. I kind of gleaned a definition of it before I ever looked it up. And when I looked it up, I'm like, that is very different from what I have thought it was. But I think so many people are afraid of the term toxic masculinity because, so many men, because they assume it means man bad, or like the stuff about men that's bad, or men being the problem. I think toxic masculinity, for me, I understand it as, if we can accept the argument that we're all yin and yang, we're all, the divine female and the divine male, we all have male and feminine energy inside of us. Toxic masculinity is an attitude that we've sort of inherited, that assumes for men that male is good, female is bad, and anything about us that is feminine or weak or female is bad, and we should like eschew that. That's one of those words I'll look up later to make sure I'm using it right. But that we should like put that to the side and distance ourselves from it. Like for example, have you ever noticed, like, you can see a guy on the subway, on the subway, it's very hot in the subway in the summer, and people will fan themselves with all manner of objects. But if you handed it, I'm like, oh, I have a fan. Would you like to just? Oh no, you cannot fan yourself with a device that is intended for fanning yourself and cooling yourself off. A man would sooner grab an encyclopedia to fan himself with than quietly crack open a fan. And right, because those are for girls, right? And that's one thing I love about like the comfort that I have now with my femininity, and it still takes something for me to fan myself in public with a fan if I've got one on my person. Like, I'm still aware, like, oh, I'm setting myself apart, I'm making myself look a little queer. But like, I think that's just a great example of toxic masculinity. Like, I'm not allowed to fan myself in public. I'm not allowed to talk about my feelings if I have a breakup with a woman. And that's why, I mean, we had a stabbing, I think just the other day, a 16-year-old boy in a high school stabbed a girl who then she was later taken off life support because she didn't make it, because young boys aren't taught how to deal with being, heartbroken, or how to deal with those kind of delicate emotions. We're just told, like, man up, don't cry, suck it up, deal with it, and just be tough. And that's what I think is toxic about masculinity, is that we're not, you can't.
You're like not a person.
It's like if you have an amphibious creature that is supposed to live part-time in the water, part-time in, the oxygen, and you force them underwater their whole life, they're going to die or get ill because they're never allowed to dwell in the opposite of that. And that's what I think toxic masculinity is the idea of, like, you can never spend time in the feminine. You have to always stay time. Well, certain things are going to start to die and atrophy. So with that said, in the gay community, there are still these old notions of, like, being manly. And, like, look, when I hook up with someone and, like, a guy comes over, yes, the moment I answer my door, the voice is deeper. I'm usually acting a bit more like a dude bro. And, like, there's sometimes the spell is never broken. Like, we're both totally dudey and bro-y. And then, like, once someone, like, called me out on it, like, as soon as I was just like, yeah, it's cool. He's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, he called me out on the voice. He's like, oh, you're doing the dude voice, huh? And then, like, and Bob always talks about the moment, like, the world. I used to think, like, oh, it's so sad for straight guys that they don't have girl. They don't have the word girl. They don't have their own version of, because, like, you can have a whole conversation with girl. And then I realized, yeah, they do. It's called dude. Dude, right. They have it. But, like, there's that moment in a gay hookup. I'm going to say gay, but I usually mean MSM. In a gay hookup where you, like, won't let yourself say the word girl. And there's that moment where it slips out where you're like, oh, girl. And then they're like, oh, girl, you too. Oh, girl. And but so there is a lot of performative masculinity in the gay scene. And with that said, I also find that there's a lot of what I would call femme shaming in the MSM community, where, it's become these hookup apps have made it so okay to be discriminatory. We're all about love and inclusion when we're marching in the parades. But then you get on these apps and people are like, no fats, no femmes, no Asians, and they'll talk about, there's so much racism in the gay hookup culture. Again, when I say gay, I mean MSM. Why don't I just say MSM then? Because it's a lot more syllables. Somehow, listen, it's like the sanctity of preference. Like, sorry, it's just my preference. First of all, you don't seem to understand what preference means. Here's how preference works. Preference means I go to Chipotle. Look at me not pronouncing things. Chipotle. I go to Chipotle and they say, oh, we are out of brown rice today. Oh, you don't have any brown rice? No, I'm sorry. Can I wait and you'll have some available later? They're like, no, there's none left in the building. Fine, I'll take white rice. That's a preference. Saying no white rice, not ever, not at all. I don't fuck with white rice. That is a bias. That is saying, like, I don't do white rice, I only do brown rice. Saying I don't have sex with black guys or Asian guys, that's not a preference.
There's a word for it.
That's actually just racism. That's what that is. That's racism. And here's the thing. Like I have certain racial biases myself when dealing with, like, who I'm sexually attracted to. And I once asked, Bob is a person of color. Bob's a black man. And I asked Bob, we used to be roommates. I asked him, like, why do you think that is that I have certain biases in who I'm attracted to? And he said, well, because you were sold an idea growing. It's so hard for me to have a conversation about masculinity without it blending into race and class and other things, but there it is. But
I mean, definitely, you're in the right place for that. I wouldn't ask you not.
But Bob said, he's like, you were sold on the idea that black isn't beautiful, and you believed it growing up. And I was like, no. And I'm like, wait a minute, why am I asking you but then arguing with you on the answer? And I'm like, you're not lying. Like, I certainly was not shown pictures of the ideal man, or I didn't see, happy couples or happy mixed race couples or happy black couples on TV. In my experience, black people weren't in commercials until after midnight. You're watching SNL Everyone in the commercials is white. SNL ends, and now it's Soul Train and Apollo, which I stayed up to watch. And suddenly, same McDonald's commercial, but everyone's black. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was such segregation in what we're shown on television.
Representation is everything.
Yeah, I mean, and like
Everything.
that's where I got my ideas. And listen, I may have my own biases on who I'm sexually attracted to based on race, but I don't accept them. Like, I challenge them. I know I've derailed us, so I think I knew where I left us off. So I'll steer us back a bit. But in the gay community, it's so acceptable to shame people for race or body or fat or femininity, or also like their disease status or things like that. And I just don't accept it. Like, honestly, like the hottest guy could. And I don't have a type, but like the hottest guy who like, oh my God, this guy is rocking my world. I want to hook up with this guy. I will risk losing his interest to have the conversation. I was like, oh my God, you are doing it for me. I would love a piece of that. And I need to say, I know I'm risking losing your interest by saying this, but it hurts me to see that you say like no femmes in your profile, or it hurts me to say that you say this.
Well, the only thing that I want to say in response is this. I feel like we always give ourselves excuses to insult others, and we don't realize the cycle that it creates, because then we're talking about compensations and things like that, and we know that compensation is very real in the performance of masculinity, and that ends up like looking like some kid stabbing a girl in his high school or mass shootings or whatever. And it's like, I feel like we just can't assume that our behavior being directed at Trump or whoever else is not having a bigger like butterfly effect that then turns into the very things that we say we don't want any more of.
I don't know how to say that any better. It's like we assume all these behaviors we don't want to be called out on, we're assuming that they're not having an impact somewhere else in the world. Exactly. And they absolutely do. And the impact that they're having somewhere else in the world because of toxic masculinity, we don't have tools to cope with those impacts. So like we're talking about addressing toxic masculinity on both ends, like removing the cap on what men are allowed to express, allowing men to access their femininity, and also like not causing these little, what I would call like microaggressions that we don't realize are hurting people, or like giving ourselves license to hurt people just because we don't want to, because we're intellectually lazy. One thing I should say is that kind of brings it back to this. Like, I remember as a singer, when I was studying voice, someone told me there's the chest voice, and there's the head voice, like that you would sing falsetto in. And someone told me, he's like, even if you never sing in your head voice, you have to still train your head voice. You wouldn't just wash the side of a dish that you eat off of. You'd wash the back of it as well. By spending time in your masculinity and spending time in your femininity, they strengthen each other. And I have to say, growing up as a gay kid, when it was so assumed that like Ben is gay, Ben is effeminate, Ben is different, I tried so hard to repress anything about me that was effeminate. But I also, like, we were told that we were rich growing up. I don't know that I would agree that we were, but I was not one of the cool kids, if you can guess. And this one kid at school once asked me, he's like, well, why don't you dress cool? Like, why don't you wear like Z Cavariccis? This is dating me.
What the hell is that? Go ahead.
You are not in high school in the 90s, I guess. But like all the clothes that would have been cool when I was a kid. He's like, why don't you dress in all these name brands and whatever, that you were only cool, like you were cool because you wore that brand. And I was just like, well, I feel like if I came to school dressed like one of the cool kids, people would be like, what are you doing? Why are you dressing like that? You're not a cool kid. Why are you trying to dress? Like, if I tried to act like a cool kid, people would immediately know that I'm not what I'm trying to pretend to be and put me in my place. Because of that, I never tried to act masculine. Like, I tried to hide my femininity, but I never tried acting masculine, because if I tried to act like a bro, people would put me in my place. And so being gay became my identity, and I sort of became this talk about performing masculinity. I performed my homosexuality. Like, I was I didn't know who else I was supposed to be, but once I discovered that I had a role I can play, I'm like, oh, I'll be the gay guy. Like, if one more person tells me, you remind me of just Jack from Will and Grace. Thank you. But like, I became just Jack, like that performative gay character. And when I moved to New York City, I noticed. I actually do a play. I can't say the name of it because it was a working title, and I really want to change the name of it. But it's a play about I hate to call it a coming of age gay play, but it's a coming of age gay play. But when I moved to New York, I noticed people here aren't doing this. The gay community is bigger here, so I don't need to act a certain way to try to find my tribe. And I started to notice, like, I'm performing my gayness, but I don't have to. And then I suddenly discovered, I'm like, if I could drop that act, who am I really? And I started noticing, like, I have all of these male sides to me that I've never allowed. Some of them emerge out of necessity. Like, having to be tough in New York is a survival instinct. And having to be short and to the point, which I associated that with being masculine, that is, not being nice, which I considered feminine. This new part of myself started emerging, this like masculine side of myself. And I thought, what if I can like lean into that? Like, if growing up I performed my neutrality and then performed my gayness, I started learning to like lean into my masculinity. This is, I'm not terribly open about this publicly, but I do talk about this in my play. So if my family's gonna listen to this, but I was an escort when I first moved to New York from like the time I was 21 to 25, and I learned really quickly what the client is paying for is the masculine experience. The first time I tried acting nice, for me that meant acting effeminate, and I thought I was just being polite. And he's not paying me to be polite and nice. He's paying me to be some tough, corn-fed Midwestern jock. And so I really learned to develop this male persona, this aggressive masculine persona, and it was fun. It was a new character I could play. So I learned to really like this side of myself, but by discovering drag and having an outlet for all of my feminine characteristics, it really strengthened me as a person, because I'm like, I now have somewhere to put my female. I have somewhere to put my male. And I know that I am not either of those things. And so I really feel like I have this healthy sense of gender where I'm like, here I am right in the middle, and I can be masculine and I can be feminine. And there is a place for all of those things in my life. And, for me, that looks like, being an escort or being sorry guys, I'm not available anymore. But, if you're my type and you got some money, I'm not going to say no. But I have a place for my masculine and feminine energy, and they all fit into who I am today, and they're all useful to me. And, because of that, I feel generally pretty well adjusted. Like, I'd feel all right talking about my feelings. And, I just have to say one, I know we're so out of time. There's so much I wanted to talk about, but I used to assume because I'm gay, I can't be sexist. And one day I just heard myself think that, and I thought, what if I'm sexist and I don't know it? And the next day, what I noticed, because I was in that inquiry, was there was a woman, there was a group of men, and all the men were talking, and none of the men interrupted each other. But this one woman started to talk, and immediately she was interrupted by a man who started explaining to her what he thought she was trying to say. And she waited, and then she's like, when he's done, she's like, yeah, well, what I meant to say was, and then another man interrupted her and told her what she meant to say was. And I'm sure none of them thought they were interrupting or doing a bad thing. She never tried again. She tried twice, and then she's like, I'm out. She just sat back for the rest of the conversation. And it was the first time I noticed. And I went home and told my mom and my sister, I'm like, oh my God. And I told them what I saw, and I was explaining to them how I felt about it. They're like, yeah, you're actually doing it to us in this conversation right now. I'm like, oh my God, I can't escape it. But like, just because I'm a gay man, I used to think I had an out from this whole conversation about sexism and about like masculine versus feminine, and I don't.
Thank you. What an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
I feel we could talk for hours, honestly.
We could.
But yeah, so before we go, I just want you to tell us where we can find.
Because you got a lot of work, and it's incredible. I think myself, I just want to be like, see all the work you're doing and everything.
Yeah, well, I want you to see all the work that I'm doing. I should say that I have a few things to plug. One thing, I promised myself I would say this before I gave my personal plugs, only because if I have an audience and have the ear of anyone, I want to get this out. A lot of people I talk to about this do not know that we now have a once daily pill that can prevent HIV infection. So many people just don't even know that that's a thing. It's been available for 5 years and no one's talking about it. So I just like saying that in case people have never heard it. It's known as PrEP, which stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. The drug is called Truvada. And if you want to find more information about it, look on Facebook for PrEP Facts, Rethinking HIV and Sex, Rethinking HIV Prevention and Sex. So there is information on that. It's available. And I would like to say you can find me at honeylabronx.com. That's HoneyLabronx.com. I'm Honey LaBronx on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all social media. I don't do Pinterest or Snapchat because I'm not 18. But you can find my cooking show, Vegan Drag Queen. Just look up the Vegan Drag Queen on YouTube. I got a cooking show. And my podcast is Big Fat Vegan Radio. And what else? Yeah, you can like my Facebook page, The Vegan Drag Queen, and go to honeylabronx.com to sign up for my mailing list and learn where I'm going to be performing and support me on Patreon. Also, support these guys on Patreon. They don't have a Patreon yet because I looked, but y'all should find some way. I'm sure there are listeners who are like, I would love to support these guys and what they're doing. But I am currently touring with my drag show as a fundraiser for local animal rescue organizations. So I just did, Baltimore and Delaware and Connecticut and New Jersey and lions and tigers and bears. And I'm about to do upstate New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut and some Pennsylvania later in the month. So you can find all of my tour info at honeylabronx.com. That's it.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Thank you. I mean, I'll be tuning in. I've never been to a Honey LaBronx show, which is outrageous. I mean, we've known each other for like 2 years now. Anyway, but yeah, okay, cool. It's been an awesome show. Remoy, do you have any last thoughts?
I'm blown away.
Yeah.
I feel so educated.
I know.
And informed.
I know. I felt hella woke.
I feel like we should do like a Oprah after the show moment where like there's like the extra hour of bonus footage because I've got it. I could go into it.
I wish. Anyway, so you guys, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Ben, for being here. Remoy, as always, it's fun. So you can find us on masculinity. You can find us on Twitter at masculinity pod. That's masculinity with a K. Always masculinity podcast on Facebook. Although Facebook is getting a little shady lately. So, but as of right now, we're still on there. So this has been Masculinity. My name is Samantha and Remoy.
My name is Remoy George Philip I.
Thank you for listening. Ciao.
Peace.